Mark Lott asked, if technologically advanced life forms exist out there, then why aren't they here? Mark, you were asking about the Fermi Paradox, which is one of the most spectacularly weird questions in science. Noted physicist Enrico Fermi first asked the question many years ago, looking out and saying, okay, if there are billions of stars out there in our galaxy, then surely there must be teeming with advanced civilizations, and yet we've seen no evidence of any of them. Why not? It only really gets interesting when you stop and look at the numbers. I mean, we use the word billion quite a bit, but we don't stop and think about how impossibly huge that number is. For example, think about the best stargazing experience you've ever had in your life. Maybe you were far away from city lights and it was just stars from horizon to horizon. And then consider the fact that as far as our eyes can see with the naked eye in space would take up this amount of our galaxy. That's pretty freaking incredible. It's been estimated that for every grain of sand on Earth, there are 10,000 stars out there. And that's just in our Milky Way galaxy. And there's an estimated 100 billion galaxies in our observable universe. The Hubble Ultra Deep Field picture contained over 10,000 galaxies, and it focused on a segment of the sky that was the size of a grain of salt held at arm's length. But still, just staying in our galactic backyard, when you consider the number of stars out there, and then you eliminate just the number of sun-like stars, and then the number of sun-like stars that might have an Earth-like planet with water on it, and then the number of Earth-like planets that might have actually, sprouted life, and then the number of Earth-like planets with life that actually created intelligent life, that's still like thousands of civilizations out there. That, by the way, is the basis of Drake's equation, which is something that scientists use to try to figure out how many advanced civilizations might be out there in the universe. But let's go even deeper. Our sun's actually a relatively young star, and the Earth's had plenty of setbacks over the years, so there's a very good chance that there are a lot of planets out there that developed intelligent life and advanced intelligent life billions of years before we did. I mean, think about how far we're going to advance in the next 1,000 years. Now imagine 1 billion. Some theorists have categorized ancient civilizations into 3 different categories. Category 1 is a civilization that's learned how to use all the energy on their planet. And Category 2 is a civilization that's learned to use all the energy in their home star. And in Category 3 is a civilization that's learned how to get all the energy out of their galaxy. That's super crazy advanced, of course, but even still, the insane amount of numbers of stars out there means that there should be several thousands of those types of civilizations in our galaxy alone. And yet, with thousands of years of people looking up to the sky and at least 50 years of SETI doing constant surveillance and looking specifically for signs of life out there, we've still come up with absolutely nothing. And that is the Fermi Paradox. It's a fascinating question with no definite answer, but there are hundreds of theories out there. And I'm going to give you 10 of my favorite. And some of these are a bit out there. Possibility number 1, we have been visited, maybe many times, but it happened long before human beings arrived. I mean, we've only been human beings as we know it for about 50,000 years. If aliens had visited here 1 million years ago, they would have been like, oh, a planet full of huge monster reptiles. Let's move along, please. Possibility number 2, we're in the sticks. It might be that the galaxy is actually vastly populated, but we just happen to live in a very remote and desolate part of the galaxy. There are some Native Americans in the further reaches of the Americas that probably didn't know that Europeans landed for a long time after it actually happened. Possibility number 3, the whole idea of colonizing and spreading is a primitive and pointless act to a higher intelligent species. It's possible that for a species to become super intelligent, they've learned to turn off their imperialistic drive and have just uploaded themselves into a virtual paradise of their own making. Possibility number 4, there's plenty of signals in the galaxy, we're just too primitive to understand it. It's like imagine walking around a city with a walkie-talkie trying to talk to somebody. There's nobody else out there because their technology is advanced a lot further than that. That's probably the case of advanced civilizations out there. We just have no idea how to detect their signals. It's also possible that there are species out there that work on entirely different time frames, so it might take them a whole decade to just say hello, but to us it's just a bunch of noise. Possibility number 5, they are all around us, but in other dimensions. A super advanced species might have learned to travel within other dimensions. There could be an alien sitting right next to you and not know it. So get your hand out your pants. Possibility number 6, there's actually a ton of evidence, but the Illuminati is keeping it secret. Possibility number 7, we're in a galactic zoo. I told you this would go to some weird places here. Some believe that there are lots of advanced civilizations out there, but they're just kind of watching us right now, like we're in a huge zoo exhibit. And maybe we're supposed to get to a certain level of advancement before they connect with us, you know? Maybe they've even got a protective bubble around us to keep outside signals from reaching us, just to keep us in ignorance. Possibility number 8, galactic predators. These next two get a little dark. Maybe there are thousands of super intelligent species out there, but they're smart enough to not make a lot of noise to avoid being attacked by predatory species. You know, like a mouse hiding from a hawk. Some of the most brilliant minds in the world are actually very worried about this, like Stephen Hawking and Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan actually was saying that it's a better idea for us to just study the universe and listen for a long time before we start putting messages out there into a jungle that we don't understand. And on that note, possibility number 9, a super predator. This is a Michael Bay film come to life. This theory states that there's only one other species out there, but it's a super intelligent predatory species that just waits for other species to get to a certain level of intelligence, just listens for their signals, and then once they find them, they go wipe them out. Haha! Which means somewhere out there is an actual Death Star. Where's Han Solo when you need him?
Chewie, we're home.
Yeah, you are! Can't wait for Christmas. And possibility number 10. There is no reality. Yeah. At least not the way you think there is. The more science progresses and the more answers we have, the more questions also seem to pop up, to the point that a lot of things at the edges of our scientific knowledge just don't make any sense. So much so that very respected scientists are starting to seriously consider the possibility that we're just living in a hologram or a computer simulation that was built just for us. There even seems to be some math backing that up. So maybe there really are no aliens. Maybe there's no us. Or maybe we only exist in the dreams of an emergent superconsciousness created by particles connected through quantum entanglement throughout space and time. All of these scenarios are actually possible, and they're all mind-blowing. But the thing to keep in mind is that behind this massive bird's nest of speculation lies an actual fact. The fact that our observations and our math just don't connect. Maybe someday we'll have an answer. Hopefully that'll be a good thing. Alright, thanks a lot for watching, and thanks to Mark for a great question. If you've got a question you'd like to ask, just leave it in the comments below, and that'll make you wiser. And if this is your first time here and you thought it was interesting at all, give me a thumbs up and a subscribe, and I will come back every Monday with more thought-provoking videos to make you feel more interesting around your friends and at the water cooler. Until next time, love you guys, have a great week. So it turns out the human race is doomed. Yay. Bud Charles asked, what about the Great Filter? Bud was commenting on a recent video I did about the Fermi Paradox, which asks the basic question, if there are so many stars in the universe, why aren't there thousands of civilizations buzzing around out there? By the way, I heard a really cool story about how this whole thing came up. Apparently, Enrico Fermi and all of his very famous science friends were hanging out at a lab one day in the break room, and the subject of little green men came up. They were joking mostly about all the UFO stories that were in the news and in the movies all over the place. It was kind of a whole thing back then. When Enrico Fermi apparently was sitting off by himself minding his own business, and he just turned around and asked, "Where is everybody?" And this went on to prompt a very in-depth discussion about, with all the opportunities for life out there in the universe, how come we haven't been contacted by any alien species? It's a debate that goes on to this very day. And I love stories like that, when just a small, insignificant observation leads to one of the biggest questions of all time. You know, it just really speaks to the power of the human subconscious mind. Anyway, where was I? The end of civilization. The Great Filter is just a way of explaining the Fermi Paradox, or maybe a better way of saying it is that it provides a framework for understanding the paradox, which only ends in two really depressing scenarios. Either we're completely alone, or we're screwed. In the first case, life itself is a great filter, and it turns out that the process of random molecules bumping against each other over billions of years until it creates something that self-replicates and works flawlessly as a machine is actually really, really hard. We'd have to rethink the way life began here on Earth, and we'd have to consider the fact that Earth is just a very special place, and that we are the only life that's ever been able to come out in the entire universe. That's pretty lonely. But then there's the other scenario in which life is actually a very common thing in the universe, but before it reaches a certain level of intelligence, something goes wrong. Maybe it's the overuse of resources on their planet, or something like climate change, or a technology that gets too advanced and then spins out of control, like the artificial intelligence stuff that a lot of people are worried about these days. But whatever it is, it's horrible, it's devastating, and it has literally destroyed every single intelligent life that's ever sprung up in the universe. And we're barreling right for it. For all of our dreaming about how young we are as a species and how far we have to go, the Great Filter idea says that maybe we're closer to the end than we are to the beginning. But there is a third option, that maybe with enough planning and enough foresight and enough action, we could be able to get through that second filter, and we might be the very first galaxy-spanning civilization in the universe. So let's get our shit together. Hey everybody, thanks as always for watching. If this is your first time checking me out, I'd love it if you hit subscribe. I come back every Monday with cool, fun, thought-provoking videos that make you more interesting around your friends. If you have a question, you can ask it down in the comments below or in any of my social media places, and I'm gonna make you smarter. Until next time, you guys have a great week. Love you guys. See you later. Time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping into a black hole. Jordan Schmidt asked, I'd like to see more elaboration on black holes. I've always been fascinated by that topic. What, an endless void through which nothing can escape, not even light punching a hole through the fabric of space-time itself? I mean, come on. What's fascinating about that? Black holes are interesting because they remind us of just how limited our perception is of the universe. I mean, gravity's so extreme it eats light. And where does it all go? It's devouring stars. All that matter has to go somewhere. I mean, some people think that the black hole punches a hole through our universe into another universe, creating a big bang and an entire universe unto itself. Some people think maybe that's where our universe came from. Think about every black hole creating its own universe, inside of which are other black holes, inside of which are its own universes. It just creates this infinite Mandelbrot set of universes that... There's far too much to discuss about black holes that could fit into one video, so I'm just going to discuss the one element of black holes that really fascinates me, and that's the way it messes with time. See, the extreme forces around a black hole don't just eat light, it also eats time. This was one of the major plot points in the movie Interstellar starring Matthew McConaughey, where they landed on a planet in which it was close enough to a black hole so that every hour on that planet equals 7 years on Earth. One of the coolest facts that I've heard about black holes is that if you were to fall into a black hole, as your body was being spaghettified into a string of atoms, the last thing you would see if you looked out would be the entire future of the universe playing out before you. Galaxies colliding, stars blinking in and out of existence until everything just dissolves away in its utter blackness. Because around the event horizon of a black hole, the time dilation is so extreme that every second you experience equals billions of years to the rest of the universe. So in a very real sense, black holes kind of exist outside the dimension of time. Even cooler, we're making black holes right here on Earth. Yeah, one side effect of the extreme forces that they're creating when they're smashing atoms at the Large Hadron Collider in Europe is that they're actually creating tiny atom-sized black holes. They're not going to eat up the world or anything, they evaporate almost immediately. But this quality of black holes, of them existing outside of time, has some speculating that if we were able to create these tiny little microscopic black holes, maybe time travel could actually be possible. But how would that work? In a minute, I'll do a little thought experiment to go through some of the various theories involved around black hole-based time travel. But first, we need to talk about what time is and how it, in physics, can go in either direction should you have the right power source. Oh, hey, Joe. Ah! Ah! What the? What did you? What the? How did you? What's happening? Where did you come from? I just went into the bathroom for the time travel gag. What, the one in the video? Yeah, the one where I pretend there's a black hole in the bathroom and I go back in time 5 minutes? Dude, that was a joke. And not even a good one. Yeah, I didn't care for it much either. What, are you saying there's actually a black hole in the bathroom? Oh, maybe it's in the toilet. What did I have for breakfast? So, you're really me from 5 minutes ago? Prove it. Tell me something only I'd know. Well, you did say Matthew McConaughey. Okay, that's a little overcritical, and yeah, you're me. Is that really what I look like when I'm sitting? Well, is the posture bad? It's bad. Well, the standing isn't much better. Really? I feel like I'm standing perfectly straight right now.
Why can't I ever sit up straight?
What is with my back?
No, wait, hold on. We gotta figure this out. There can't be two of us.
Well, apparently there can.
No, I mean, there can't be, like, two of us walking around, living life.
Why not? I mean, I'm always complaining about how I never have time to work on stuff because I'm always at work. I mean, maybe one of us is the one that goes to the job and the other one stays here and works on the fun stuff. Call it!
No, none of this works. We would still have to eat. That would add up after a while. Besides, how would we keep this from Amy?
Hey, maybe we could talk her into a little...
Oh, sure. Let's double her disappointment.
Actually, none of that's gonna happen.
Why not?
Because you're gonna go to the bathroom.
I don't think so. It was just a gag. I'm especially not going to go in there now that I know what happens.
You have to.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. And in fact, I know it's going to happen.
Why?
Because if you didn't, I wouldn't be here. The only reason I'm here is because you go into that bathroom and you go back in time 5 minutes.
You know what? No, I don't think so. This is my timeline, okay? This is where I belong. You popped into my timeline. Why should I be the one that goes?
Because that would create a paradox, and then I would cease to exist.
What are you talking about? You can't just blink out of existence.
I just blinked into existence, didn't I? And that would be the best case scenario. Worst case would be we'd tear apart the very fabric of space-time itself. We could destroy reality.
Okay, but what happens to me? I go in there and then what? We become the same person again or something?
Well, I assume you'll just go back in time to the timeline 5 minutes ago like I did.
And cease to exist in this one. Wait, you were surprised. You didn't expect me to be here. If I went back in time, I would remember this, but you were surprised.
Maybe when you go back in time, you lose all the memory of the time that you just passed.
Or maybe I go into a completely different third timeline because this has already happened before.
Maybe there are infinite parallel timelines that you could bounce from one to the other.
Or maybe I'll just cease to exist because there can only be one of us without destroying reality. Holy shit, I've actually got to go in there, don't I? This was one of the major plot points of the movie Interstellar that starred Matthew McConaughey. Screwing myself up saying McConaughey. MLP Luigi said you should do a video on the Kardashev Scale. In my video on the Fermi Paradox, I talked about the possibility of other alien life forms out there in the universe. Or more appropriately, the lack of them considering the very high possibility of them existing. And one way that scientists have classified these life forms is by using the Kardashev Scale. Not to be confused with the Kardashian Scale, which is a ratio of hip to badonkadonk. Not to be confused with the Babadook, which is a horrifying movie. Which is not to be confused with the Baba Booey. Or the Baba Ganoush. I'm hungry now. The Kardashev Scale was created in 1964 by Russian astronomer Dmitry Kardashev, and it basically rates alien life forms based on the amount of energy they're able to utilize. Why energy usage? Because it's a very important indicator of how technologically advanced a species is. Take humans, for example. For hundreds of thousands of years, the most energy we were able to create was by burning things. As our technology advanced, so did our ability to generate energy, although we really just made advancements in how we burn things. Which is really embarrassing when you think about it. Kardashev hypothesized that there's really three types of advanced alien species out there. Type 1 is able to harness all the energy on their home planet, Type 2 is able to harness all the energy in their home star, and Type 3 is able to harness all the energy in their entire galaxy. So let's talk about these one at a time and see exactly what they mean. So what does it mean to harness all the energy in your planet? It's a lot more than just sucking every ounce of oil out of the ground and burning it. It also means collecting every single gust of wind, collecting every wave and tide, collecting all the heat from geothermal vents, and collecting every single photon of sunlight that hits the surface of the Earth. Which scientists have calculated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to the power of 17 watts. That's 10 with 17 zeros behind it. Almost as big as my electric bill. Of course, doing all that would make our planet completely unlivable, so how does a civilization become Type 1 without destroying its entire planet? Internuclear fusion. If you ever wondered why people make such a big deal about nuclear fusion, consider the fact that to make that kind of energy required for a Type 1 civilization, we would have to fuse 280 kilograms of hydrogen into helium per second. At that rate, you would use 8.9 times 10 to the 9th kilograms of hydrogen per year. That sounds like a lot. But you can pull more of that out of 1 square kilometer of ocean water. And our oceans hold 1.3 times 10 to the 9th kilometers of water, which means we'd run out of water about 100 trillion years after the sun explodes. Speaking of the sun, while the methods required to get to a Type 1 civilization are out of our grasp, they at least seem feasible. To get to a Type 2 civilization, you gotta get a little more imaginative. The most widely known theory to collect all the energy from a star is what's called a Dyson sphere. This idea was proposed by Freeman Dyson in 1960, and it involves building a gigantic sphere all the way around a star that would collect all or most of its energy that comes out of it. Freeman Dyson is still around, by the way, 91 years old and still kicking. Good show, old chap. Such a massive structure would require resources and manpower that you can never find here on Earth, but some scientists speculate that you could create self-replicating robots that could mine the solar system for resources and build it on its own. It's not too far-fetched, really. In fact, a lot of scientists who are searching for extraterrestrial life are looking for signs of Dyson spheres and interruptions in the light patterns from stars. Now, other ideas actually involve throwing a star into a black hole and then creating the energy from the accretion disk that forms through what's called the Penrose process. Of course, if you do that, it could cause a black hole to lose some of its angular momentum and eventually could stop rotating completely, which would make it a Schwarzschild black hole, and I have no idea what any of that means. But if the idea of throwing a star into a black hole sounds Looney Tunes, the methods required to create a Type 3 civilization is straight up crazyville. How in the name of Xenu do you capture all the energy from a galaxy? Well, you could put Dyson spheres around every single star in a galaxy. There's only about 100 billion of them. Or you could tap the energy of a supermassive black hole, which most galaxies have in their centers. Gamma ray bursts are the most powerful explosions in the universe. You could somehow tap that. And there's the idea of a theoretical white hole, which actually spews matter and energy out of a singularity instead of sucking it in. If you could find one of those, you could use that. Pretty much when you start talking about Type 3 civilizations, you're just playing around in science fiction territory, which is what makes it kind of fun. Some scientists have taken it even further and speculated there could be Type 4 civilizations that collect all the energy in the entire universe, or Type 5 civilizations that collect energy from multiple universes. But the thing about a Type 4 civilization like that is that it would be completely undetectable by us because their actions would be indistinguishable from just the workings of nature. Tell me that doesn't give you a nerd boner. And physicist Michio Kaku speculated that a Type 4 civilization would have moved on from traditional sources of energy altogether and would be harnessing more exotic forms of energy like dark energy. Another variation of the Kardashev Scale was suggested by physicist John Barrow, who said instead of going big, we should go small, saying that you could categorize civilizations by the level of matter that they can control. Like a Type 1 civilization would be able to control matter at its own size, Type 2 would be able to control genes, Type 3 would be able to control molecules, Type 4 would be able to control individual atoms, Type 5 would be able to control subatomic things like neutrons and protons, Type 6 would get down to quarks, and Type 7 would be able to harness and manipulate the fundamental elements of space-time itself. Now, a lot about what gets talked about when we deal with the Kardashev Scale has to do with alien civilizations, and that's all well and good, but what it really does is it serves as a cool roadmap for where we could possibly go as a species. Carl Sagan suggested that we're about a 0.7 on the Kardashev Scale right now, and Michio Kaku said that we could reach Type 1 status in about 200 or 300 years, and maybe Type 2 status in a couple thousand years.
So how do you think is the best way for us to get there? Let's talk about it in the comments below. If this is your first time visiting my channel, welcome, I'm glad to have you. Hit the subscribe button up above if you think this is some fun content, and if you want to see what else we have going on here, check out the playlist on this side, and it'll give you a good idea of how much fun we're having. I said this side, didn't I? It's actually that side. And if you like it at all, give it a thumbs up. That helps Google show it to more people out there and gets this message out to more people. Big thanks to MLP Luigi for a great comment and for being a great commenter. I love having all these people in my community. You guys go out there and you have a great week. Thanks a lot. Love you guys. Take care. Whoa.
Oh, are you filming?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's alright.
This morning, when I woke up, my senses went to work. I saw the stove, I felt the warmth of the pan, I heard the bacon crackling and smelled the aroma before I put it in my mouth and tasted heaven itself. All this is real, right? Senses don't lie. According to science, maybe not. You might not actually exist. And here's why. Pioneer wrote, "Joe, make a video about the holographic universe theory." Like many scientific breakthroughs over the last half century, this one all starts with Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking studied black holes, and one of the biggest mysteries about black holes is what happens to the information once it falls inside of it. Information is basically the mathematical term for matter, like the arrangements of atoms and subatomic particles and their positions in spacetime. But where does it go from there? Well, according to our favorite half-robot, half-human, it just ceases to exist. Which violates some pretty serious laws of physics, especially in quantum physics. Because a fundamental law of quantum mechanics says that information is encoded into the wave function of particles, which means, according to the law of unitarity, all the information is conserved in a quantum sense. In other words, information has a mathematical copy in the quantum world, which means that information can't ever really be lost. But general relativity, which Hawking specializes in, says that it can be lost. And that became known as the Hawking Paradox. Because when you're really smart, you get to have things named after you. Oh, relativity and quantum mechanics, won't you ever get along? So along came Leonard Susskind, a quantum physicist, who had his own ideas about black holes. Coming from the quantum side of things, he postulated that the information doesn't fall into the black hole at all. It actually gets encoded onto the surface of the event horizon, and what falls into the black hole is a projection of what's encoded on that surface. Kind of like the surface of the black hole is a film strip, and it's being projected onto the inside. Now, I need to say, this involves math way above my pay grade and abilities. But suffice it to say that Susskind was able to tie all this together with some extreme math that actually tied together general relativity and quantum mechanics in a way that actually made sense. The only problem is, it didn't make sense. It was actually quite crazy. Because this means everything inside of a black hole is a perfect projection of what's on the outside of a black hole, which means there's two of everything. If you were living inside of a black hole, you would have no idea that you were simply a projection of the real you, which existed on the surface of the black hole. Which leads to the next obvious question. Are we just projections? How do we know that we're the real ones and not the copy? There's really no way for us to know. So the idea was understandably met with a healthy amount of skepticism, but it was still solid enough that mathematicians took after it to try to perfect the theory. And sure enough, someone cracked it. Juan Maldacena mathematically proved the holographic principle in what he called the ADS-CFT correspondence, a conjecture between the equivalence of string theory on anti-de Sitter space and a conjecture of conformal field theory that's defined on the boundary of ADS space. So, with the math in place, the holographic principle won out, leading even Stephen Hawking to concede that going against the holographic principle was one of the biggest blunders of his entire career. It should be noted that when we talk about projections and holograms, we're speaking in very metaphorical terms. Nobody's actually saying that there's a film strip on the edge of the universe through which light is projected that creates us. It's really more of a multi-dimensional construct of entangled quantum particles creating copies of everything in quantum space. See, we have brains and senses that are made specifically for the dimensions that we can see, that allow us to wake up in the morning and go downstairs and start our day with bacon in our bellies. And it's an enormous challenge for a person to completely rewire their brain so that things like quantum mechanics and string theory make sense. That's why there's only so few people in the world that can do it. So they use metaphors like holograms and projections so that the rest of us can get some kind of an idea of what they're talking about. But at this point, it's pretty much settled science. Figuring out whether or not we're real or the projection, well, that's the next big step. And it's a big one. What do you think? Are we the reality or are we the projection? Let's do it up in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to Pioneer for a question. If you have a question you'd like answered, you can hit me up on Twitter or in the comments below. If you learned anything, give me a thumbs up, and if this is your first time here and you like it, put a ring on it and subscribe. I come back with stuff like this every week. I think the world is a fascinating place, and I'm here to share all that interestingness with you. So you go out there, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Love you guys. Take care. Honey, it wasn't me making out with your sister, that was just the projection of me. For today's video, I want to do a little experiment. Follow the instructions in this video. What it's going to do is it's going to show you how to shine a laser through two tiny little slits and then project what that does against the wall. I really want you to try this because you should see with your own eyes the phenomena that has led to a series of discoveries that has challenged everything we know about light, matter, and reality itself. Super answer file MLP Luigi said, "Can you do a video on the double-slit experiment?" Yes, I can. Oh, right, here we go. Let's step in the Wayback Machine to the late 1600s, where it was pretty much settled science that light traveled as a particle. There have been a lot of experiments to back this up, and it even had the support of Sir Isaac Newton, and he was not known to be wrong about things. But then a physicist named Thomas Young created the double-slit experiment. And it consisted of a box through which light traveled through two very tiny slits, and then a little eye hole where he could look in and see what that did when it projected to the other side of the box. The thinking was that if it traveled like a particle, it would create two parallel lines on the other side of the box because it was projecting through those lines, just like bowling balls flying through pins at the end of a bowling lane. That's not what happened. What he saw instead was the same strange pattern of lines that you're seeing in this experiment. Young recognized what he was seeing right away. It's an interference pattern. You see, when waves combine, it creates what's called interference. Like if you take waves in water, when they hit each other, the peaks will combine to create taller peaks, and the peaks and troughs will cancel each other out, which creates this pattern of higher peaks and then stillness. And when that gets projected against a surface, you get the weird double-slit experiment pattern. This only happens if light is traveling as a wave. That's the only explanation for this. The test was replicated in hundreds of different ways in the years following this discovery, and even Isaac Newton himself had to concede that yes, light can travel as a wave. But other experiments showed it traveling as a particle. So what is it, light? Are you a wave or a particle? This particle-wave duality became known over time as, well, the particle-wave duality. And it was a mystery that confounded science for the next 200 years. By the 1920s, the physics community had much better instruments at their disposal, and they decided to add another layer to the double-slit experiment. You'll see this over and over again, experiments building on top of other experiments, increasing in complexity and weirdness. So the new twist on the experiment was basically asking the question that if the photons were behaving as waves and colliding with each other on the other side of the slit, what would happen if you fired the photons through one at a time? The guess is that you would get the particle pattern of two complementary parallel lines. After all, how can you get a wave interference pattern when there's nothing to interfere with? So they gave it a try, and to everyone's shock and amazement, they still got the interference pattern. But how? How? There is nothing for that photon to be bumping into. What could it possibly be colliding with to create this pattern? The answer? Itself. You see, somehow this photon was going through both slits at the same time and then colliding into itself on the other side of the barrier. And this revealed a fundamental truth about quantum mechanics. In a waveform state, quantum objects exist in a probability state, meaning that at any given time it could go through the left slit or the right slit or hit the barrier. While in a waveform state, that photon is all three at once. It is 33% in the left slit, 33% in the right slit, and 33% hitting the barrier. Actually, that's incredibly simple math. There are highly complex equations out there that calculate probability states with a high degree of accuracy. But eventually the waveform has to go back down to a particle, and that's called the waveform collapsing. In the case of the double-slit experiment, that happens when it hits the back wall. And this experiment's been replicated over and over and over again, even with different particles like photons, electrons, protons, even whole atoms and molecules. So now we know that fundamental elements of matter can pop in and out of existence through probability states. But that's where things just start getting weird. Because for the next evolution of the double-slit experiment, they wanted to see if they could measure the probability states as they went through the slits. So they set up a little detector on one of the slits to see if they could measure it. This was called the which way experiment. The results shook scientific understanding to its core and remains unexplained to this very day. Because this time, the pattern on the back of the wall displayed what you would expect with particles going through the slits. Two lines, no interference, no waves. This means that the waveform collapsed before it went through the slit. Why? Because it was being observed. This proved that the act of observing the particle caused the waveform to collapse. How is this possible? How can it know that it's being observed? And what is the connection between the observation and the wave function that's causing it to collapse? This experiment has been repeated countless times to the exact same results, and we have no explanation for this. But wait, it gets weirder still. John Archibald Wielder created a version of this experiment that he called delayed choice. Wish I had a cool name like Archibald. It gets pretty complicated, but the basic gist is that he puts a second barrier behind the first one, and through beam splitters and interferometers, he makes it so that the second barrier could be one slit or two, and he changes that while the photon is mid-flight. And what he found was that by changing the structure of the second slit, it altered the behavior of the particle at the first slit. In other words, the particle was being altered by things that hadn't happened yet. Future events were changing the present. Ow. What the hell? Anyway, when Thomas Young created the Double-Slit Experiment, he had no idea the endless series of mysteries he was about to unleash on the world. And he had no idea that these mysteries would shape and confuse our very ideas of the nature of the universe and reality itself. How does conscious observation change the nature of matter? Truth is, we don't know, but it brings up some fascinating ideas. So now that I've melted your brain, I want to hear what you think. Go ahead and talk it all up in the comments. There are no wrong answers here. Thanks so much for watching, and to MLP Luigi for asking an awesome question. If you have a question, you can hit me up in the comments or tweet me a question at @JoeScottWriter, and we can get smarter together. If you learned something in this video, give me a thumbs up. That lets Google show it to more people. And if it's your first time here and you like it, put a ring on it and hit subscribe. I come back with stuff like this every single week. The world's a fascinating place, and I'm here to share that interestingness with you. So you guys go out there, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Love you guys. Take care. I've talked many times on this channel about the weirdness of the quantum world, but there's one phenomena that stands far and above the rest when it comes to weirdness. Something so strange it seems to defy all the laws of physics as we know it. I'm talking, of course, about quantum entanglement, or as Einstein called it, spooky action at a distance. Spooky action at a distance. Ah! Don't worry, that's not a spider. That's just my new green screen. Actually, let me take care of that real quick. Better, yeah? Alright, where were we? Oh yeah. Weird quantum space. Rhett Elliott asked, can you do a video on quantum entanglement? So subatomic particles are measured through several sets of data according to their location in space-time, also known as its information. One of these vectors is called spin, which is a function of its angular momentum. Of course, this being the quantum world is not as simple as just an object rotating. The spin is released in quantum packets, which requires the particle to be given a quantum number. And one of the little rules is that the particle can't change its speed of rotation, but it can change the direction of its rotation. Now, like a lot of things on this channel, there's a lot of science and math behind how they figure out the rotation of a particle, and I'll link to all that down below, but suffice to say, they have figured out a way to do it, and it's very reliable. So, now we understand spin. So let's step back a bit. A few weeks ago I did a video on the Double-Slit Experiment. You can see it right here. It explains how subatomic particles exist in probability states, also known as superposition, which means that they exist in all positions at the same time until they are measured, which causes its waveform to collapse. At which point you can measure its spin. Before the waveform collapses, it's spinning in all directions at once. Now imagine that one of those photons were split into two while in superposition, which turns out is fairly easy to do by shining light through the right type of crystal lattice. Now you have two separate particles in superposition. What would happen if you measured one of them? Would both of their waveforms collapse? Or just the one you measured? It turns out they both collapse. The change you make in one particle automatically affects the other. You observe this one collapses. You change the spin of that one, the other one changes. And it happens instantaneously, no matter how far apart the particles are. Even if the particles are in two galaxies millions of light years away, they change direction instantaneously. This is quantum entanglement. Of course, this breaks all kinds of physical laws. How does this information travel faster than the speed of light when the speed of light is the fastest thing in the universe? The answer to that question can be summed up in one mathematical equation. Yeah, It's far more than just a strange quirk of the quantum world, though. The Big Bang Theory states that all matter started from a single point and spread outwards, which means that there could be entangled particles all over the universe. In fact, every particle could be entangled with another particle, or groups of particles, or even billions of particles. And every time we measure a particle or change its spin, we're actually affecting other particles all over the universe. There's even a theory by our old friend John Archibald Wheeler called One Electron Universe Theory, which is exactly what it sounds like. It theorizes that every electron in the universe is the same electron, traveling backwards and forwards in time on a world line that has been folded up on top of itself like a giant knot. I'll give you a second to put your brain back into your head on that one. Now go through the ear. The ear's the best way to go. So you can see why Einstein had a real problem with quantum entanglement as a thing and never really fully accepted it. He and several other scientists came up with alternative theories that they called loopholes. Unfortunately for Einstein, new experiments are erasing the loopholes and proving once and for all that quantum entanglement is a real thing. Just last week, some researchers at the Calvi Institute of Nanoscience in the Netherlands were able to connect quantumly two particles at a distance of 1.3 kilometers, which is to this point the furthest they've ever been able to do so. Future experiments aim to lengthen this distance. There's even one in the works where they're going to send a quantumly entangled particle up to the International Space Station. As for what applications this may have, some scientists imagine the possibility of a worldwide computer network connected through entangled particles in which information would be in all places at all times. There would be no such thing as internet speed. The internet would just be there. I see your gigabit internet and raise you infinity. Thanks for watching. If you learned something, hit the thumbs up button. That helps Google show it to more people. And if this is your first time here and you like it, put a ring on it and subscribe. I come back every Monday with more videos just like this. Be sure to share this with other curious people. And if you have a question you'd like answered, you can ask it in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter at JoeScottWriter, and we can blow some minds together. The world's a fascinating place, and I'm here to share all that interestingness with you. So go out there, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you back here on Monday for the next Answers with Joe. Thanks a lot for watching. Love you guys. Take care. In 2008, I did something kind of horrible. I picked up this rock from the ground. Why does this make me a terrible person? Because it's actually not a rock. It's part of a brick. And the place I picked it up was an ancient Roman fort. I kind of stole from an archaeological site.
That belongs in a museum!
I know! Sorry. But I couldn't help myself. Because 2,000 years ago, another human being held this brick. He spoke a language that no longer exists. He paid for this in a currency that no longer exists. He worshipped gods that no longer exist. He used a measurement of time that no longer exists. And he was a citizen of one of the most amazing civilizations that has ever been on this planet. That no longer exists. And I'm sure that as he laid this brick down and put another brick down on top of it, he never could have imagined that 100 generations later, a guy living in a part of the world he's never even heard of could talk about this brick. And that message would travel further around the world in a single instant than his glorious civilization had spread in 1,000 years. A lot can happen in 2 millennia. To try to plan something out that far would be an exercise in futility. Hell, most of us can barely plan out what we're going to eat tonight. But for a small group of people, 2,000 years is just a drop in the bucket. They're thinking 10,000 years ahead. And they want all of us to do the same thing. Randall Everett asked, what modern structures are most likely to stand the test of time? Ancient Egyptians built pyramids that were meant to last until the end of time. And so far, so good. Today, I live in Dallas, and a building that's 50 years old is considered a historical artifact. Most of us just live generally in the present moment, concerned only with our own lifespans, which in the big picture of things is a mere blink of an eye. But there's a group that wants to change that. They're called the Long Now Foundation, and their method for doing so is a clock. A clock that's going to tick for 10,000 years. It's called the Clock of the Long Now, and it's a big-time idea. See what I did there? Nailed it. The Long Now Foundation was created in 1996. It was the turn of the millennium, and everybody's minds were focused on the future, but nobody more so than Stuart Brand, Danny Hill, and the musician and artist Brian Eno. They had the idea to build a monumental clock that would last 10,000 years in order to promote long-term thinking. But how the hell do you build a 10,000-year clock? Well, they started with a set of parameters, including longevity. The clock should be accurate even after 10,000 years and must not contain valuable parts such as jewels, expensive metals, or special alloys that might be looted. Maintainability. Future generations should be able to keep the clock working, if necessary, with nothing more than advanced Bronze Age tools and materials. Transparency. The clock should be understandable. Without stopping or disassembling it, no functionality should be opaque. Evolvability. It should be possible to improve the clock over time. And scalability. To ensure that the final large clock will work properly, smaller prototypes must be built and tested. The thing that I find interesting about these design parameters is that it takes into account both the engineering and social challenges of this machine. You know, would people want to steal from it? Would people be able to understand it? Would people be able to repair it even if society got knocked all the way back to the Stone Age? They had to account for every single variable, both in nature and in humanity. You know, these people probably won't be able to speak the same language that we do. They may not even be the same species. The main engineering challenges were, of course, in longevity. How do you power something for 10,000 years, and how do you keep it accurate for that amount of time? More complex power solutions had to be thrown out because it had to be manageable by people who had no knowledge of technology whatsoever, so things like nuclear and solar were out. They came up with an ingenious solution that used the difference in temperature between night and day to power the clock. Oh, and did I mention it's inside a mountain? It's inside a mountain. It's inside two mountains, actually, in very dry, arid regions where the difference in temperature between night and day is really extreme. One of those areas is in Texas on land that belongs to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Construction's already begun on the mountain, which is kind of a 2-scale prototype of the main clock, the Big Mama Jama, which will be built into a mountain in southern Nevada. Actually, it's Nevada. I don't know if it's southern Nevada. It rhymed and I wanted to get the number of syllables correct. Funky Fresh and making ill rhymes all the time. 2 smaller prototypes have already been built, one of which is housed at the Long Now Foundation headquarters and the other is in the Science Museum of London. So, the temperature of the mountain can keep this bad boy going, but is that enough? Well, it turns out it doesn't take much power for the clock to keep time, but it does take a little bit of power for it to display the time. So anybody who wants to view the display on the clock has to wind it up first. That's kind of the price of admission. But they'll be rewarded with something really cool. A chime will play that has been mechanically rigged by an algorithm created by Brian Eno so that every single chime is different. For 10,000 years, every single person that hears this chime will hear a different chime. But what this person sees as they're hearing this chime, how the time is displayed, is a whole other dizzying conundrum all its own. For starters, you can't just say the year 2015, because a 4-digit year won't make any sense after the year 10,000. Therefore, you have to display the year as 02015. In fact, the same issue that caused all that panic in the year 2000, the Y2K crisis, could rear its ugly head even more so in the year 10,000. They're already starting to call it the Y10K crisis. But what if society completely breaks down and they have no idea what those numbers mean? Well, they've included a star field on there, because while a lot of things might change on Earth in 10,000 years, the stars are going to be pretty much the same. But let's consider that possibility again for a second, because I find this really fascinating. Consider that society completely collapses. And sometime 10,000 years in the future, some future civilization comes across this device that seems to count the days for some reason. Would they assume that it was built at year 0 on the device instead of 2,000 years later? Maybe they'll think that it's counting forward to a specific date in the future, like some kind of doomsday date, like we look at the Mayan calendars or something. Maybe they'd think it was put there by the gods and it becomes some kind of holy shrine. An entire religion could spring up around what these guys are building. Or maybe it'll just be an interesting relic of the past. A place where people can go and hold in their hands things that people built thousands of years before, and they'll think about how people back then could have never even imagined the wonders of the world that they live in now. And that is the very point of the Clock of the Long Now. To get people to think in long time frames, not just today, but for the entire time that it runs. And that is a big time idea. Hey, if this is something you've never heard about before and you learned something, hit the like button. And if this is your first time here and you like it, put a ring on it and hit subscribe. Speaking of time, I'm not sure how well that Beyonce reference is aging. If you've got a question you'd like answered, you can ask it in the comments below or hit me up at Joe Scott Writer on Twitter, and we can blow some minds together. The world's a fascinating place, and I'm here to share all that interestingness with you, so go out there, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Love you guys. Take care. Every great scientific concept requires a mathematical formula for it to be considered real. Einstein theorized that gravity can bend light, but he had to create a formula for that to be taken seriously. When they couldn't explain the orbit of the planets, Sir Isaac Newton created calculus. And when this guy couldn't figure out women, he created the hot crazy index. And then the question of whether or not we're alone in the universe, Frank Drake came up with a formula. And that formula has been the basis of equal parts skepticism and hope ever since. Conan Skyfire asked, can you please do a video on Drake's equation? You really can't talk about Drake's equation without covering the Fermi Paradox, which I talked about in the previous video. But the basic gist is, with so many stars in the galaxy and so many galaxies in the universe, there shouldn't be a pantload of civilizations out there, and if there are, how come we've seen no definitive proof of it? The quest for an answer leads to a lot of speculation about what exactly it takes to create life, and more rarely, intelligent life. All this speculation fascinated Frank Drake, so like any good scientist, he created a formula for it. Now, math and formulas can be really super confusing when you just have a whole jumble of letters piled up next to each other, but it makes a lot more sense when you apply it to actual real-world situations. For example, if you want to know how many Saved by the Bell cast members were in this stadium, you'd start with the number of people in the stadium, minus anybody born in the last 20 years, minus anybody who's not an actor, minus anybody who doesn't know Tiffany Amber Thiessen, minus people who have never been on the show, and you've got Zack Slater and Screech. Oh, Screech. Justin Diamond's had some hard times. Justin Diamond, by the way, is the brother of Mike Diamond, also known as Mike D from the Beastie Boys. True story. Anyway, using that same process, Frank Drake's equation tries to subtract over and over and over again until you find a general answer. So N is the number of intelligent civilizations in the galaxy. This is what we're trying to solve for. R is the yearly rate of star formation in our galaxy. FP is the number of stars that have planets. Kind of hard to have life without a planet. NE is the number of planets that are habitable. FL is the number of planets that support life. FI is the number of planets with intelligent life. FC is the number of intelligent beings who have the ability to create and use technology that we can see, like radio waves. And L is the length of time a technological civilization remains detectable. Now, the place where Drake's equation breaks down, according to the skeptics anyway, is that many of the variables in this equation are just guesses. They may be educated guesses, but still guesses nonetheless. So let's go through the letters one by one and determine why each one of these are so difficult to determine. R, the yearly rate of star formation. This is something we can actually observe, and the current estimate by both NASA and the European Space Agency is about 7 per year. The number of stars that have planets. Almost 2,000 exoplanets have been confirmed as of the recording of this video, and new ones are being discovered almost on a daily basis. At this point, most astronomers believe that the ratio is pretty much 1 to 1. In other words, it's expected that every star has some type of planet. But the number of habitable planets gets pretty interesting. Because what we consider to be habitable is basically just what is habitable to people like us. Because we've only seen one kind of life, and that's Earth life. The question becomes, how common is it for life like us to evolve? And that basically splits people into two different camps. Those who follow the law of mediocrity, and the rare Earth hypothesis people. The law of mediocrity starts from the premise that our very existence proves that life must be a common occurrence in the universe, that it's essentially biased to say that we're special or unique. It came as sort of a rebellion to the earlier days of believing that we are the center of the universe and the solar system. It was Copernicus's new model of the solar system that made us realize that we're not that exceptional, we're just another rock floating around the sun. That's why it's often called the Copernican principle. So this is a much more hopeful view of the argument, saying that life must be very common, and even a small percentage would still create a whole lot of opportunities. But the rare Earth people see it a totally different way. They're not necessarily saying that we're special, but they definitely think that we're the exception. They point out that there were a lot of very unique and specific things that happened in the formation of our planet that made it habitable that would be very difficult to reproduce somewhere else, very unlikely to happen again. And some of these things include a friendly galactic neighborhood. Planets too close to the center would get too many cosmic rays. Just the right type of sun, not too big and hot, a slow burner that will last a long time. In the Goldilocks zone, not too close to the sun and not too far away. Has a thick atmosphere and liquid water. Has just the right tilt, 23 degrees. Much larger and the seasons would be too extreme, baking one pole while freezing the other. And much shallower, it would just scorch the center of the planet. Has a stable moon. Our moon not only causes tides that move the water around the Earth, but it also works as a gravitational gyroscope to keep the Earth's rotation from changing too much. And it has just the right size proportional to the planet at just the right speed. And the only reason we got our moon is because our planet was almost destroyed by a dwarf planet that tore away enough debris to form the moon. Really, the moon is an unsung hero in the story of life on Earth. Has tectonic activity. Our planet is constantly renewing itself, not to mention creating heat that warms the waters and pumps greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to maintain a warm crucible for the carbon cycle to take place. And finally, below all that tectonic activity is a solid iron core surrounded by a liquid core, which means the two cores are spinning against each other, which creates the Earth's dynamo. Our dynamo generates a strong magnetic field that protects the surface from harmful rays, but also shields our atmosphere from being picked away by solar winds, which is exactly what happened to Mars's atmosphere. Not to even get into the very specific percentages of elements in this particular planet, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, ultimately carbon dioxide, and water, that may be the crucial elements for life to form. The rare Earth people say that all these factors combine to make a very infinitely specific condition for life to form on Earth, and it would be very, very hard for that to replicate somewhere else. Both of these viewpoints are perfectly valid, but they've created a range between millions of worlds and maybe none. But that hasn't stopped people from trying. In 2013, a group of scientists using Kepler Space Telescope data said they calculate that there are up to 40 billion Earth-like planets orbiting Sun-like stars in the habitable zones of our galaxy. Since there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy, that gives a ratio of 0.4. So whatever it is we decide is the definition of a habitable planet, how many of those planets would actually go on to create life? Well, that's the next variable, FL. And there are many schools of thought on this as well. One states that if planets become habitable, that life springs up pretty quickly, as evidenced by the fact that studies have shown that life sprang up on this planet pretty much right after it stopped being a giant fireball. But DNA studies have shown that really in its form and function, DNA is pretty much the same in all living things around the planet. Animals, plants, you name it. Which means that it all started from a single place. And if life was so easy to start, then why wouldn't it have started in several different ways on the same planet, also known as abiogenesis? Some argue that it could have, but the established life beat it out every time. Sounds like our life is the bully of lives. This is why we're spending so much time and money trying to find traces of life on Mars or on comets and asteroids, because if we could show that life was able to form somewhere else here in this solar system, this part of the equation would pretty much be settled. The ratio would be 1 to 1. Every habitable planet contains life. Fi isn't any less controversial. It's about how many planets go on to create intelligent life. Some point to the fact that there have been hundreds of billions of species on this planet, and only one has ever developed what we consider to be intelligence. They say that's proof that intelligent life is extraordinarily rare. While others say that the natural trend toward increasing complexity in life means that intelligent species are practically inevitable given enough time. In other words, it ranges between 100 billion and 1. Other people point out that even on habitable planets, the likelihood of massive natural disasters makes it very rare for life to stick around long enough to become intelligent. But even on planet Earth, we've been an intelligent species for about 100,000 years, but we've only in the last 80 years or so been smart enough to release radio waves out into space. This is the next variable, FC, the number of technological life forms. Or a better way to say it, the number of intelligent species that have been able to not wipe themselves out long enough to be able to put radio waves into space. Which we've been able to do despite countless efforts to put ourselves out of existence through war and violence. In fact, I want you to all Google this guy's name, Vasily Arkhipov. Take his picture, print it out, frame it, put it on your wall. I want you to wake up every single morning and see this guy's face, because this guy single-handedly prevented the end of life as we know it. I'll put the links in the description below, but during the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1961, he was a second-in-command of a Soviet submarine that was sailing off the coast of Cuba. They got picked up by an American aircraft carrier. The carrier began dropping practice depth charges to get them to surface, which was not an unusual thing. Usually the protocol was they would warn the other ship that they were sending down practice depth charges and then send them to the surface. This was to make sure they understood that this was just a signal and not an attack. But the B-59 that Arkhipov was on was too far down in the water to actually receive those radio signals, so they didn't know that it wasn't an attack. Their orders in such a situation was to launch a nuclear torpedo, but it required the agreement of 3 different people on the ship. And Arkhipov, the second-in-command, was the only one that refused to go along with it. This prevented the mutually assured destruction scenario that the US and Russia had been building toward for the last several decades. And that's just one example of how close we've come in the past to wiping ourselves out. And any technological civilization that can put radio waves in outer space would have to have avoided that fate as well. Now, we've been putting radio waves out into the universe for about 80 years, which is the last variable, L, the length of time that a species can communicate. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, which means that our signals have traveled 80 light years away from Earth. There are nearly 5,000 stars within 80 light years of Earth. Of those, about 2,000 are sun-like stars. Imagine for a second that an advanced alien species was 70 light years from Earth and detected our first signals, was able to figure out where it came from, and beamed a message back. It would take about 70 years for their message to reach us, which we wouldn't receive until 2075. By the way, I'm horribly oversimplifying this. I'll put some links in the description for a more detailed examination of this issue. I definitely encourage you to read it because it's fascinating stuff. Now, there are critics of Drake's equation that say that the whole thing is meaningless because several of the variables are open to wild speculation and what's called anthropic bias. Because we only have one subject of study, one planet that we can draw data from, and that planet was chosen by the very organisms that live on that planet. And the scientists call that the 0 degrees of freedom fallacy. Ultimately, Drake's equation isn't meant to be hard science. It's really more of a discussion piece. In fact, it was something that he put together as an agenda for discussion at the 1961 Green Bank Conference in West Virginia. But the fact that it's only a thought experiment doesn't take away from its importance. Now, this has been a really long video because each one of these variables could be a video all its own. And these discussions help us to understand and refine our place in the universe. It's also helped direct our research into the cosmos. I mean, keep in mind, in 1961, when this was first postulated, they didn't know that there were any other planets out there. Now we know there are thousands of them. Maybe in time, those other variables will be whittled down as well, and we'll have a clearer picture of just how spectacular, or mundane, our existence really is. Check out the links in the description below to go even further, and let me know in the comments, are you a law of mediocrity person or a rare earth person? If you learned something in this video, give it a thumbs up, and if this is your first time here and you like it, hit subscribe. I come back every Monday with mind-blowing topics just like this one. If you've got a question you'd like answered, you can ask in the comments below or hit me up at Joe Scott Writer on Twitter, and we can get smarter together. The world is a fascinating place, and I'm here to bring all that interestingness to you, so you guys go out there, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Love you guys. Take care. NASA gonna NASA. Dan Riddle asked, what are your thoughts on the impossible M drive NASA's talking about? So I started looking into this M drive and I found out that NASA's actually working on a lot of really cool stuff right now, so I'm going to do a video where I talk about the 5 coolest. NASA's always been working on new engines throughout its history, but one that's gotten some really positive and interesting results recently is called M drive. But the reason the M drive is in the news is because these positive results they've been getting tend to kind of break all the laws of physics. And scientists don't like it when their physics don't work anymore, which actually seems to be happening a lot lately. Now, M-drive has been a theoretical idea since around the year 2000, but it was always dismissed outright because it breaks Newton's third law. That's the one that states that every action has to have an equal and opposite reaction. See, that's how spaceships work. They move this direction because there's an opposite force going that direction. But this drive works by bouncing microwaves around inside of an enclosed chamber, which produces quantum fluctuations that provides thrust, without any kind of actual force being applied to the outside of the engine. A NASA scientist once said that this is like moving your car forward by pushing on the steering wheel. It's minuscule thrust at the subatomic level, but it's constant acceleration, which means it adds up exponentially, and over time you could go incredibly fast. And since it only uses electricity, it requires no fuel. And since it uses no fuel, Texas will probably ban it. All of this was totally theoretical until just a few months ago when they tested the engine and found that it was producing 30 to 55 micronewtons, which is incredibly small but still measurable. It's so small, in fact, they thought it might have just been produced by the air pressure around the engine, so they tried it again in a total vacuum, and guess what? It still worked. And it still shouldn't. So let's see, an engine that uses no fuel, has no moving parts, and could make interstellar travel possible? Yeah, let's play with that one. So NASA's been working on long-term plans to send humans to Mars for decades now. It was always a foregone conclusion, right? The next logical step in space exploration. But is it? While everybody else has been looking out towards Mars, a small team at NASA has been looking the other direction, at Venus. Now, anybody that knows anything about Venus knows that going and landing on that planet would basically be like dropping right into a giant Earth-sized oven, because the temperatures at the surface can melt lead. But that doesn't scare NASA scientists. They work in Texas. The air pressure at the surface of Venus is 93 atmospheres. For reference, the air in the room that you're sitting in right now is 1 atmosphere. Venus is 90 times higher pressure than Earth. This sounds impossible, but if you were standing on the surface of Venus, you would experience the same amount of pressure as if you were swimming a kilometer below the surface of the ocean. It would crush you like a soda can. Gee, this sounds like a great place. Why are we going there? Because at such high pressures, a lightweight craft pressurized to the same level as here on Earth would never even get close to the ground. It would just bob around in the upper atmosphere like a cork on the top of the water. Dirigibles, zeppelins, blimps, all kinds of lighter-than-air vehicles could be connected, forming an entire colony just floating around in the clouds of Venus. An actual cloud city. And the temperatures up at that level of the atmosphere might be quite comfy, as opposed to Mars, which averages somewhere around 100 degrees below zero. And Venus is half the distance of Mars. For all these reasons, there are people around NASA that think that Venus might be the better option. Look, if we're gonna get a cloud city, I get to be Lando. I called it. Going from Cloud City to Water World. In the search for life beyond Earth, one of the most promising places to look is Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. It's almost entirely covered with ice, but it looks like a good contender for 2 reasons. One, it's got a very smooth surface, which means that it's constantly refreshing itself. It's an active place. And the other thing is that the Hubble Space Telescope actually spotted plumes of water vapor coming off of the surface, which means there's probably a lot of liquid water underneath all that ice. It's thought that it's an ocean kept warm by tidal flexing caused by the extreme gravity around Jupiter that makes the water and the ice and the rocks inside of the planet rub up against each other and creates heat. Warm liquid water worked pretty well here on Earth, so we think that there might be a chance for life on Europa, but the problem is, how do you get past all that ice? NASA is developing a robotic drill that would drill through the ice and then swim around in the water using motions based off of squids. It would be the first interplanetary underwater rover. A robot squid with a giant drill in its head swimming around inside the waters of a moon around Jupiter. And still no jetpacks? Really? Last year, the European Space Agency scored one of the biggest victories in science when their Rosetta mission landed a probe on a comet, which led millions of Americans to look up at the sky and ponder the question, Europe has a space agency? Never one to shy away from an international pissing contest, NASA said, oh yeah, well, we're gonna go do the same thing, except we're gonna bring it back. Stupid Europe. And they gave it what is easily the coolest space probe name of all time. OSIRIS-REx. OSIRIS-REx's mission is to land on the asteroid Bennu and collect samples from underneath the surface and bring them back home so that the scientists can study them right there with their own hands. Or multiple hands should it contain some kind of mystical cosmic element that would cause them to grow extra appendages and have special powers. Comic books don't lie. The mission will give us a first-hand look at the building blocks of our solar system, as well as give us information on how we might someday destroy the asteroid. Yeah, building blocks of a solar system, whatever. Wait, we gonna blow something up? We may want to destroy Bennu someday because the projected path shows that it might possibly collide with Earth sometime in the late 22nd century. I am Bennu, destroyer of worlds. All hail Bennu! All hail Bennu! All hail Bennu! Bennu, by the way, was named after its discoverer's favorite piece of IKEA furniture. That's probably not true. Finally, after 25 years of the Hubble Space Telescope sending us mind-blowing pictures that have made us reconsider the scope of the universe and our place inside of it, NASA has decided to make that telescope its bitch. The James Webb Space Telescope is scheduled to be launched in 2018, and it's being called the Great Pyramid of our generation. And for good reason. The mirrors on the James Webb Space Telescope measure 21 feet across, as opposed to Hubble's 8-foot mirror, and it can collect 7 times more light. This extra girth allows it to penetrate more deeply into space, giving us a more full experience of the Big Bang. Because light travels at a constant speed, the further we see out into the universe, the further we see backwards in time. For example, when we look at a star that's 100 light years away, what we're really seeing is what the star looked like 100 years ago, because the light that left it 100 years ago is just now reaching us. Through its giant mirror and its focus on infrared light, the James Webb Space Telescope should be able to see up to about 100 million years after the Big Bang, which means we're going to be able to see some of the first galaxies in the universe forming. This will give us a better understanding of the rapid expansion and cooling that took place at the very beginning of our universe, which gives us a better understanding of the forces that guide our universe today. So maybe we'll finally understand how M-Drive works. Alright, thanks for watching, and thanks to Dan for a great question. If you've got a question you want to ask, you can ask it in the comment section down below or hit me up at any of my social media channels and we can be smarter together. If this is your first time here and you enjoyed what you saw, you can check out all these playlists over here to get a better idea of what I do. And if you want to catch me every Monday, you can hit subscribe up above. I come back every Monday with cool, thought-provoking videos that'll give you something interesting to talk about with your friends in the water cooler at work. And you can catch me on Periscope. I actually am periscoping the recording of this right now. I don't know how often I'll be doing that, but you can follow me there at Joe Scott Writer. And I do fun stuff from time to time, and you can be a part of it. Alright, thanks again for watching. Love you guys. Have a great week. See you soon. It's projected trajectory. Okay. Projected trajectory. What a horrible combination of words. Projected trajectory. Projected trajectory. I'm not even going to try. One time in my high school science class, our teacher lit a candle, and she asked us a really simple question. Is this alive? I mean, obviously it's not alive, and we all agreed to that, but then she asked us to explain why it's not alive. And then things got interesting. Well, it can't think, so obviously it's not alive. Jellyfish don't have brains. Are you going to say they're not alive? And what about trees? Well, maybe they can't think, but they can react to the environment. Looks like it's reacting to me. Well, a living thing has to eat to survive. It has to consume things. This flame is consuming the candle wick, the wax, and the oxygen in the air to survive. It doesn't reproduce. Living things have to reproduce. Now, this was just a high school science exercise, but it touches on a question that's surprisingly complex and increasingly difficult and important to answer. Chris Young asked, what is life? How can we actually define something as living? The physicist Erwin Schrödinger defined life this way. He said, living things avoid decay into disorder and equilibrium. In the simplest terms, this means that living things are constantly rearranging their constituent parts in order to maintain their present condition. Take a human cell, for example. It's a living thing, but it's made up of non-living things. It's basically just a protein-based machine that turns sugar molecules into ATP and pulls organic compounds out of this soup to create RNA and DNA. None of the parts of the cell are anything that we would call alive, but the cell definitely is. And of course, the RNA and the DNA go on to create whole new people that continue it on for a whole new generation. And that's actually one definition of life. It's called the information theory. DNA is basically just a set of information, and this theory states that life exists to perpetuate this information. But as Chris pointed out in his question, viruses pass their information along, but viruses aren't considered to be alive because they don't actively resist the decay into disorder. They're more like keys that just kind of drift along until they snap into a lock being the receptor sites on cells. Bacteria are considered a type of life because they do actively seek out cells to invade and do follow some kind of order. But to cloud things a little bit, the mitochondria in our cells, it's believed, used to be a standalone bacteria that then way back in our evolution invaded a single-cell organism and then just became an organelle, just a part of that cell. And now they're not considered to be alive. So this simple question of what is life is actually really complicated, and nobody really knows quite sure how to answer it. And ironically, now more than ever, we really need to have an answer to this. We're more engaged than ever before in the search for life outside of Earth. You know, we're roving around on Mars, we're landing on comets, we're finding planets in other solar systems. If we found life somewhere outside of here, it would be a huge game changer. But where do you draw the line? How do you know for sure that what you found is actual life and not just an assemblage of organic compounds? Besides, the only life that we know of evolved right here on Earth. Would we even know a different kind of life if we saw it? And speaking of primitive life, the way we define this actually makes a drastic change in when life started here on Earth. You know, they actually just recently pushed back the time frame that they believe that life began by about 2 billion years, which actually means that life started really fast. Artificial intelligence is progressing at a really fast rate. At what point do we consider that to be some kind of life? Are we really just an assemblage of non-living things that happen to develop a consciousness? Maybe the real mind-blowing question is, on a fundamental level, does life exist at all? Or is everything life? Once upon a time, we separated ourselves from the animal kingdom. We thought we were special. As science progressed, we began to understand that actually we're very connected to all the other animal species around the world. Maybe we're on the cusp of another fundamental shift in consciousness where we understand that not only are we not different from the animals, but we're not different from everything else. From the rocks and the trees to the other planets and stars all around the universe, we're all the same stuff. So what do you think? Is there something special about life itself, or is it just an inevitable process of chemistry and physics? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks everybody for watching. If this is interesting to you, I've got some other videos I'm going to link down in the description that actually do a really good job of explaining this topic. Definitely go check them out. Thanks a lot for watching. If you learned something, hit the thumbs up button, and if this is your first time here and you like it, put a ring on it and subscribe. I come back every Monday with videos just like this to blow your mind. If you have a question you'd like answered, ask it down in the comments below or hit me up at JoeScottWriter on Twitter and we can get smarter together. I always say the world's a fascinating place and I'm here to bring all that interestingness to you, so you guys go out there, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Love you guys. Take care. So you may have heard about a new movie coming out, a little film called Star Wars. Now, I was really into Star Wars when I was a kid, but I'm a grown man now, and I mean, it's fun, but I'm not going to get all excited just because of a new movie that's coming out. David K. asks, can you do a video about the Alcubierre drive? No. I mean, yeah, Mexican physicist Miguel Alcubierre came up with this idea for a warp drive that would allow us to go faster than light, but I mean, come on. Could it do the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs? And yes, George Lucas famously misused the term parsecs because it's actually a measure of distance and not a measure of time. It would be like bragging that you ran the 100-yard dash in 100 yards. But I digress. But seriously though, the Millennium Falcon can book it, and even though it was designed to look not really impressive,
what a piece of junk!
It's become one of the most beloved and awesome spaceships in all of science fiction. Which really sucks that we're never going to actually see a spaceship that can fly as fast as the Millennium Falcon. I mean, at least until we can get around the speed of light problem, which would require some kind of groundbreaking warp drive technology that... Wait a second. We should talk about the Alcubierre drive. Miguel Alcubierre is pretty much a badass. He got his PhD in numerical general relativity and worked for years at the Max Planck Institute studying the math behind black holes. He's also worked extensively on Einsteinium field equations, using supercomputers to develop the idea of solitary wave solutions that are helping bridge the gap between general relativity and quantum physics. But he's best known for a paper he wrote in 1994 titled The Warp Drive, Hyperfast Travel Within General Relativity, in which he proposed a warp engine that would allow you to travel faster than light by curving space-time. What it does essentially is it creates a bubble around a spacecraft that contracts space-time in front of it and expands it behind it. Like if you can imagine a spaceship on an elastic string, with the string being space-time, you could contract the string in front and expand the string in back to make the spaceship move forward. The ship is still in the same place on the string, but the string itself has shifted. And that's how it would work with the Alcubierre drive. The ship would remain stationary inside the space-time, inside the bubble, but on the edges of the bubble, the space-time would be curved. Easy peasy, right? Well, there's one drawback. According to Alcubierre's calculations, the amount of mass needed to curve spacetime in this way would be equivalent to that of Jupiter. It's a pretty big ship. But the good news is that in recent years, a guy named Harold White working at the NASA EagleWorks lab has refined the equation to make it so that the ship could work on only 65 exajoules of energy, or the same amount of energy the US consumes in an entire year. And to make things more difficult, it's not just an amount of energy, it has to be a special kind of negative energy that requires an exotic type of matter that we haven't discovered or created yet. So yeah, there's some hurdles to overcome. But the EagleWorks team's working on it. Right now they've got an experiment going where they're using laser interferometers to try to create tiny microscopic warp bubbles. It would be a sort of a proof of concept. And a proof of concept is important. In fact, the very first nuclear reactor only produced enough energy to barely run a light bulb. But now they power entire cities and propel submarines through the water. If White and crew can create a tiny little microscopic warp bubble in a lab, then we might be onto something. White's colleague, Mark Rademacher, created a CGI prototype ship that they're calling the IXS Enterprise to get people inspired and pumped up about the possible future technology, which might be closer than you think. NASA has a goal of attaining interstellar travel by 2100. So how fast could we actually go with the Alcubierre drive? The EagleWorks team is estimating that the Alcubierre drive could power a spacecraft up to 10 times the speed of light. The speed of light being about 300 billion meters per second, that would mean the Alcubierre drive would travel about 3 billion meters per second. Basically, the distance between the Sun and Neptune. In 1 second. Pretty damn fast. But is it as fast as the Millennium Falcon? The website Tor.com did an article where they tried to calculate the speed of the Millennium Falcon by using maps of the Star Wars universe and the time it takes in the movie for them to get from the planet Tatooine to Alderaan. Or where Alderaan was supposed to be. It's excruciatingly detailed, and I'll link it in the site down below. Definitely go check it out if you want to get all the nuts and bolts of it. If your nerd erection lasts longer than 4 hours, please consult a doctor. But they calculated that the Millennium Falcon would have to be traveling at a mind-blowing 25,000 light years per day, or 1,042 light years per hour. So to make that comparison, a light year is roughly 9 trillion kilometers, or 9 quadrillion meters times 1,042 per hour, and you get 9.38 quintillion meters per hour. Divide that by the number of seconds per hour, and you get 2.605 quadrillion meters per second. And we've got the Alcubierre drive at 3 billion meters per second. So, Millennium Falcon for the win. But really, was there any doubt? So I grew up with Star Wars when I was a kid, and I played with all the toys, but man, the toys they have with this new movie are just bananas. They actually have a flying Millennium Falcon drone. Seriously, I would have lost my mind if I had one of these when I was a kid, and they're not cheap, but if you're interested in getting one, I'll put a link in the description down below. Now, full disclosure, I am an Amazon partner, so if you do purchase it through the link down below, it wouldn't cost you another cent, but it would kick a little bit back to me, so it would support the channel. For those of you who don't spend your free time swimming in a pool filled with gold coins, another way you can support this channel would be to share this video on your social networks. It really goes a long way toward putting this out there and showing more people the kind of fun stuff that we got going on here. As always, if you learned something, give me a thumbs up, and if this is your first time here and you like it, put a warp bubble on it and hit the subscribe button, and we'll come back with more fun stuff like this every Monday. Thanks to David for a great question. If you've got a question you'd like answered, you can put it in the comments below, or you can hit me up at Joe Scott Writer on Twitter, and we can get smarter together. Now, whether it's your backyard or in a galaxy far, far away, the universe is an amazing place, and I'm here to bring all that interestingness to you. So you guys go out there, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you next time. May the Force be with you. There's an experiment that was done, I want to say sometime in the 1800s, and I don't remember the name of the scientist who did it. I'll have to look it up and put it on the screen somewhere inconspicuous. But they had known for a while that if you shine light through a prism that it would break up into all these different colors. So they knew that white light was made up of many different colors that were combined into one. And there was a scientist that just had an idea. He just wanted to know which one of the colors was the warmest, like which one gave off the most temperature. So he did an experiment where he shined some light through a prism at a table, and then he set up thermometers along the different colors of the spectrum to see which one registered the warmest. And so he had a thermometer right around blue, and then green, yellow, orange, red, and then he had one off to the side next to the red where there wasn't any light as a standard, a normal control temperature that he would compare the others next to. So he set this whole thing up and he let it go for a little bit, and he came back later and he looked, and to his utter surprise he found that the thermometer that no light was falling on, the one over beside the red where there wasn't any light on it, it was warmer than all of them. Well, this of course didn't make any sense, so he redid it a few times. He kept getting the same result, and this was basically the discovery of infrared light. He realized that there was a wavelength of light, of energy, that was hitting that thermometer that he couldn't see, and it was below red on the spectrum, so therefore they call it infrared light. This is one of those great science stories where a guy just had a crazy idea. He just wanted to know which one of the temperatures was warmest, and he wound up discovering an entire form of light that we can't even see. That's one of my favorite things about science. Sometimes it starts off as just a really dumb idea, and then you wind up making some world-changing discovery. And this really was world-changing, because this was part of the process of discovering that light only exists as a small fragment of a vast electromagnetic spectrum, spanning all the way from gamma rays down to radio waves. I would love to have known how mind-blowing this was at the time, to realize that light itself is just such a small part of this much, much, much bigger thing that we had no idea existed beforehand. How exciting is that, and how just world-changing is that? It's actually a really significant, awesome discovery. So I'll talk about all that just to create context to something else. So science, as we know it, breaks down in two places, in the science of the very big and the science of the very small. They look at galaxies and they can measure the mass of all the stars in a galaxy, and they know how much gravity should be there for that certain amount of mass. And they do the calculations on their big computers, and they realize that actually all that mass is actually not enough to keep it together. It shouldn't be clumped together like that. All the models show that that amount of mass in that much space, the stars should just be flying off into space, but they're not. They're all clumped together into a galaxy, and this doesn't make any sense. So from that, scientists created the concept of dark matter. That there's a type of matter out there that we can't see or detect that's actually keeping galaxies together. And then they look at the fact that all the galaxies are expanding away from each other. Space-time itself is stretching, and the galaxies, the universe itself is expanding. And it's expanding at an accelerated rate too. It's not getting slower, it's going faster. Well, you can't accelerate without some kind of energy to propel that acceleration. So what's that energy? Where's it coming from? How's that working? They don't know. They have no idea, so they create dark energy. So dark energy is this energy that they can't account for that's causing the entire universe to expand and accelerate. And it's really unfortunate that they named it dark matter and dark energy, because they really have nothing to do with each other. One of them is holding galaxies together. Dark matter holds galaxies together, and dark energy spreads the galaxies apart. So that's the science of the very big. And then when you go down to the science of the very small, the quantum, the subatomic science, science breaks down again. When you get down into the subatomic level, into the quantum level, things stop making sense. Particles start appearing in two different places at once. They find out that there's quantum entanglement, where a particle over here could be spinning this way, and a particle over here, which could be thousands of light years away for that matter, is spinning the same way, and then if you change the spin of this particle, it will immediately change the spin of this particle, regardless of distance, regardless of how long it should take for the information to get from this particle to that particle. It happens instantaneously across thousands of light years. So a particle on one side of the universe, if it changed its spin, could change the spin of a particle on the other side of the universe at the exact same time, even though they're really living in two completely different time dimensions. When they get down to the subatomic level, they don't even talk about things existing in a single place. They exist in probabilities. So the science of the very small breaks down, and the science of the very big breaks down. And for many decades now, scientists have been trying to come up with a way to tie those two together. And the best thing that they've come up with so far is string theory. Now, I'm not going to go completely into string theory, but string theory basically is the idea that at the tiniest levels, the universe is made up of vibrating strings that when vibrating at different frequencies will create different states of matter. It gets really complicated, and very few people really understand the entire idea behind string theory, but it does tie together in the math the science of the very large that breaks down and the science of the very small that breaks down. It's the theory of everything. But there's a hitch. The only way that string theory works mathematically is if there are 11 dimensions. What does that mean? So we know of and experience in life 4 dimensions: length, width, height, and time. The classic example is if you have a meeting at, say, the corner of 5th Street and Avenue A on the 3rd floor at 9 a.m. Well, 5th Street runs this way, that's 1 dimension. Avenue A runs this direction, that's another dimension. And then you have the 3rd floor, which is a height dimension. And then 9 o'clock is a time dimension. So we experience 4 dimensions. But according to string theory, there are actually 11 dimensions. It's very possible that as we continue to explore ideas like string theory, that we're going to find out, just as we did with the electromagnetic spectrum, it could be that we're about to find out that reality as we know it is only a small sliver of a much bigger spectrum of realities. What we experience is only less than half of what's actually out there. Let's just think about that for a second. This could open up opportunities for new types of energy. This might blow open all kinds of spirituality if you think about it. I mean, if we actually, have some kind of a universal consciousness that we all tap into, it could exist in one of these dimensions. God could be in one of these dimensions. We might find out that there are creatures and aliens and beings all around us that we don't even know about existing in dimensions that we can't perceive. This could explain ghost phenomena. This could explain angels. This could explain demons. I mean, all kinds of stuff that we've kind of believed in as a civilization, as a society for a long time. Now this is all getting really woo-woo. I know. But it is an exciting field of study, and it's really an exciting time to be alive. And I really think we're about to be on the verge of a whole new paradigm shift in how we view all of reality as we know it. Hold on tight. Get some coffee.
Today I talk about the possibility that you could actually live forever, or bear witness to the extinction of the human race. Strap in. Mark Lott asked, does artificial intelligence really pose an existential threat to humanity? Mark, it's awesome that you asked this because this is the single most important question for the future of humanity, and I mean by far.
and nobody's talking about it. So basically there are three different types of artificial intelligence. Artificial narrow intelligence, or ANI, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and artificial superintelligence, ASI. An ANI computer can do one specific task really well, and right now, they're all around us. For example, a GPS device can pinpoint your exact location far better than you can. Factory robots can be programmed to build cars faster and more accurately than any human can. Speech-to-text devices can translate human speech into words. Calculators can process numbers way faster, millions of times faster than any human can, and web browsers can find information anywhere in the world at any time. And they do these things very, very well. But that's all they can do. And while it may seem that some of our technology has moved beyond this stage, what you're really seeing is just a series of separate ANIs. Take Siri, for example. If you ask Siri if you need to bring an umbrella today, she'll use her speech-to-text ANI to translate that into words. Her ANI programming will then take those words, which have been pre-programmed, that tells her to then activate her web browsing ANI to search the Weather Channel for temperatures. She'll use her GPS ANI to figure out exactly where you are, compare that to what it says online, and then feed that information back to you. Now, all that's impressive, but all she's really doing is just following a pre-programmed set of commands. She doesn't know what you're asking her. Like, she doesn't know that the reason why you're asking is because you don't want to get wet. And for that, you need AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. AGIs are computers that can function exactly at the same level as a human brain, and as it turns out, this is exceedingly difficult to do. Because, not to go on a tangent here, but the human brain with its 100 billion neurons and 6 quadrillion connections is quite literally the single most complex thing we know of in the universe. And what's interesting is while we can program a computer to handle the most unimaginably complex math problems, it has trouble doing the most basic stuff that we don't even have to think about. For example, a computer could easily unravel a series of complex calculus formulas and measurements to calculate the trajectory of comets and asteroids in a solar system. But when shown this picture, it doesn't know whether it's a cat or a dog. That's why CAPTCHAs work, because images that are easy for us to figure out are very hard for a computer. There's just a level of pattern recognition and context and creativity that we just haven't quite reached with computers yet. So, how do we get there? Well, it's not just about adding speed. It also has to get smarter. You can increase the speed of a chimp's brain, but it still wouldn't think like a human. It still lacks the cognitive modules it takes to get there. In fact, there's already a supercomputer in China that surpasses the speed of the human brain, but it takes up vast land and resources, and it still can't tell you why Adam Sandler's funny. So there's a couple of options to get computers to that point. One is just trial and error, and the other is to kind of copy evolution. I mean, it worked with us. If you program a computer to improve itself, it'll prune off the unwelcome scripts, the things that don't work, and it'll heighten and improve on the ones that do work. And over time, meaning thousands of calculations per second, it'll just increase in speed and functionality like an exponential feedback loop. Many computer scientists are already working on this, and it's a consensus among future thinkers and scientists in general that we're going to reach AGI status in 10 to 35 years. And this estimate is partly based on Moore's law. Moore's law was created by Gordon E. Moore in 1970, which predicted that computer performance was going to double in power every 18 months. And anything that doubles over and over and over again is exponential growth, which is really important to all this. If you think this pace of progress is not believable, it's because you're thinking linearly and not exponentially. Here's a little bitty to explain exponential growth. If you take a piece of paper, it's only a fraction of a millimeter thick. But if you fold it once, it's now twice as thick. Fold it twice, it's now 4 times as thick. Fold it 3 times, 8 times as thick. Fold it 4 times, 16 times as thick, and so on and so on. Try to guess how many folds it would take to reach outer space. 30 folds. That's pretty amazing, right? You know what's even more amazing? The number of folds it would take to get to the moon? 42. It took 30 folds to get 60 miles up into space, but only 12 more folds to get 250,000 miles to the moon. The further you go in exponential growth, the bigger the growth becomes. So if the Earth was ANI and the Moon was AGI, we might just now be getting into space at about 33 folds. But that means that the Moon is only 9 folds away. And according to Moore's law, that's about 10 years. So let's say we get there and we create a computer that's as smart as a human brain, so smart in fact that it can improve itself. Then what happens? Let's keep in mind, if a computer is as smart as we are and it makes itself even smarter, it's now smarter than we are, which means it can improve itself even faster, to make it even smarter, which can make it even faster, to be even smarter and faster and smarter, until it's thinking on a level that we can't even comprehend. And that is artificial superintelligence. And this is where things get really crazy. Because it doesn't have to be that much smarter than us to make a huge difference. In the animal kingdom, chimps are arguably closest to us in intelligence. They're just one step down. But a chimp can't look at a building and realize that somebody made that. It can't look at a work of art and find the metaphor in it. It has no idea that we're traveling around the sun and not the other way around. That same gap would exist between us and an intelligence just one step above us. It could think of things that we can't even conceptualize. It could harness energies and technologies to solve every problem we ever had, provide for every need we could ever have. It would literally be godlike in our eyes. And it could happen fast. Like, really fast. Like, within days of reaching AGI. Because, you know, exponential. In fact, a lot of people think that if we invent artificial superintelligence, it will be the very last thing that we invent. Both for good and for bad. And here's where this ish gets real. Like, really real. Because once we reach ASI, there's only two possible outcomes. Immortality or extinction. If done right, an ASI that's programmed to take care of us and see to our needs could make us immortal. It would cure cancer, it would reverse aging, it could fix any injury by rearranging our molecules at an atomic level. It could create food that was completely waste-free. It could terraform other planets and reverse climate change on our own. We could go on forever. Or, let's say a paperclip company has an ANI machine and its only job is to create more paperclips. It is made specifically to come up with new and better ways to make more paperclips. And somehow, through some fluke, it achieves ASI status. And then it scans the internet and finds out that the entire world is full of stuff that can be mined to make more paperclips. It could mine the entire world. But human beings wouldn't let it do that. So they've got to go. It creates swarms of nanobots that fly around and simultaneously release a toxic gas that kills all the people. Then it mines the entire Earth. When it runs out of that, it sends probes out to asteroids to mine the asteroids. And by the year 3000, the only proof that we ever existed is a series of machines stripping the entire solar system to make curly bits of metal wire. You see, it's not about whether it's a good AI or a bad or an evil AI like you see in the movies. It's just about what was it programmed to do. This event, this moment, where our future diverges into one extreme or the other, is something that many people who are smarter than everybody watching this put together feel quite sure is going to happen, probably in the next 100 years. Ray Kurzweil calls it the singularity. Which one of these two scenarios is more likely to happen is up for debate, and a lot of it. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom suggested that extinction is an attractor state that every species eventually goes towards. 99% of every species that has ever lived has gone extinct, and at some point each one of them reached a tipping point that led them down that path. He uses a visual of a balance beam. Each species is walking along a balance beam, and the floor is extinction, and eventually something comes along to knock the species off down to the floor of extinction. Whether it's an asteroid, or climate change, or a more advanced species coming along, or habitat loss. Artificial intelligence might be the tipping point that knocks us off the beam. But some people believe that there is a second attractor state, one that goes the other direction. Immortality. They argue that immortality is something that every species is destined to do once it reaches a certain level of intelligence. We just haven't seen it yet. And they think that ASI could be the tipping point that leads us down that path. One more thing to consider if you think that super intelligent computer technology that takes care of everything for us would make us lazy and weak, you have to consider that as we merge with technology, ASI could pull us up along with it. We're already merging with technology if you think about it. If you drove to work and got halfway there and realized you left your phone at home, you'd panic. That's merging with technology. A super intelligent machine could manipulate our brains at the molecular level, making us smarter than we ever thought possible. It can maybe even connect us to its own network, giving us vast information about the universe at our fingertips at all times. The history of humanity will someday be gauged by things that happened before and after this event. It is quite literally the single most important thing that will ever happen to the human species. And the most amazing thing is, most of the people watching this video right now are actually going to get to see it. And we only have one shot at it. Godspeed. I highly encourage all of you to read up on this because not only is it just super crazy and interesting, but it is also the single most important thing that's ever going to happen in our lifetimes. I got most of the information on this from an article from a website called Wait But Why. It will take you half a day to read it, but it is incredible. I'll put the links down below. Definitely go check it out. Bring this up at the next social event that you attend or at the water cooler up at work. We need to be talking about this. We need to be able to affect the direction that this thing is going to go. Feel free to pass this video along. And if anything in this video made you want to tell somebody about it, you are in my audience. So please, if this is the first time watching, hit subscribe. I come back with thought-provoking videos every Monday. And finally, what are your thoughts about this? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think we're going to get wiped off the planet, or do you think that technology's always made our lives better and this is no exception? Alright, thanks again for watching. Love you guys. See you next week.